this book was also very personal because it was basically the book that I wish had always existed. And after years of waiting for it to suddenly materialize, that's kind of when I decided that I probably just had to write it myself. And so it's a story of three Asian American girls living in Brooklyn, and it follows the year in their life after they graduate college and have their first jobs as editorial assistants in various publishing companies. And it was drawn from a lot of my own experiences and a lot of things that I just made up or heavily fictionalized because my actual life is pretty boring. So I'm always writing fiction, even though it's based on a couple of my own experiences. But so the book follows these three friends, and they're also and along the way they befriend their 92-year-old neighbor, who it turns out is like a Booker Prize winning novelist from the 70s, but whose work has kind of faded into obscurity by the time they meet her. And they kind of take it upon themselves to give her the recognition that they think that she so rightly deserves, because for them, she's the author that they had wished had always existed. Like she's this like trailblazing Asian American writer who writes about kind of just like the inner working domestic lives of Asian American women, and kind of resisted being fetishized in her time. And so they kind of make it their mission to kind of get her recognized eventually. So the book really like just delves into their friendship, like delves into the frustrations they feel at their first like entry level jobs in publishing. And I always I kind of just like pulled everything that I love from various books. Like I love books set in workplaces. I love books that would really examine female friendships and Asian American stories. And I also kind of love books where nothing happens. But I know that like that's that's kind of like an editor's worst nightmare. So I kind of like forced myself to like really think through in terms of like plotting the novel. But I really do like scenes where like friends are just kind of like sitting around and talking about like completely, completely like low stakes things. So there's lots, this is kind of what I consider like a hanging out novel. Um, and also I just love books about the publishing industry and the book industry in general. Like I've always loved reading, but I also always kind of was curious about how books came about, like how editors choose which books eventually become the books that we see in bookstores. And I'm just curious about the literary world in general. Um, and then after a couple of years working in the publishing industry, much like the characters in my book, like I, I was a bit disillusioned as well. And it, it was kind of difficult for me to enjoy reading in the same way. But I think after a couple of years of distance, I was able to kind of um, think back on those years in a more positive light. And I think that's kind of what propelled me to write this book, because I did want it to be a realistic book where, um, I mean, the girls are still like 22, 21 at the end of the book, so they don't have their whole lives figured out, and they're not going to single-handedly change the book publishing world. But I just wanted to show like some of the lessons they learn along the way, or some of the non-lessons that exist. But that's kind of like how this book came about, and why a lot of the writing cues I chose tonight are writing related or publishing related, or like how you see yourself as a writer and artist, because that's what a lot of the characters spend their time doing, is kind of like imagining their place in the world as editors, as writers, or just like trying to figure out what their path is in life. And for me, that's always going to be a subject that I'm interested in reading about and writing about and illustrating. Yeah. Okay, so for the first writing prompt, um, again, it's related to imagining your life as a writer or an artist. So you wrote a best-selling Nobel Prize winning book. What are your dream blurbs from your favorite writers that will appear on your book's cover? And so this is the example I give, which is I imagine Zadie Smith blurbing one of my books. This book shook me to my core, and now I'm retiring. There's no way any writer could top this monumental work of art. So just imagine your own blurb from your own favorite writer or your dream writer, and um, feel free and don't be humble. Like really go for it. Okay, so for the next writing prompt, this is inspired by the character in my book, like Veronica Vo, who's kind of a writer I made up, but it's someone that I also wish had always existed. So, write a brief autobiography of a fictional writer. This is an author you wish had always existed, or maybe someone you aspire to be. They can be an amalgamation of Joan Didion and Toni Morrison, or any combination of writers who exist or who don't exist. Give an overview of their books, awards won, personal controversies, love affairs, legacy, etc. And if you frequently browse Wikipedia like I do, my favorite section is always personal life. So feel free to get as specific as you want in terms of that.
Writing a book with multiple protagonists, how did you kind of go about forming their own storylines and their characteristics? Because they're all very different people. And did they kind of come to you fully formed as different people, or did you have to kind of find out who they were through the writing process?
I'm glad that you see them as such like different people because they're all kind of just three different versions of myself. And I kind of see them as me in different stages of my life in a way. And maybe as a pretty self-centered person, that's kind of how I write a lot of my characters. They're either like idealistic versions of myself or who I aspire to be, or brutally realistic versions of myself. And so for these three characters, part of them were inspired by my own friendships and especially with my two best friends. Other parts of it were inspired by like different parts of my career paths. Like I've worked at those three publishing houses of different sizes as well. Um, and for me, like that since this book is so focused on their careers, part of their characters were shaped on like what jobs they eventually took on. So for example, Sharon works at an academic press, which is like textbooks and like very dry, like academic journals. And she's not really sure if that's really what she wants to do with her life. So she kind of is like the more of the chaotic person in the trio and who's kind of like aimless and not really sure what she wants to do with her life, which is like perfectly fine at that age, and at most ages really. So for this book, a lot of the characters were just shaped by like where I saw them in their workplace, because at its heart, I do see this as a workplace novel, and so that's kind of what helped me shape each character.
Yeah, fantastic. That is so cool to hear. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll start at the beginning with Ozma's question. How do you plan your graphic novels? What is the process that you go through to do that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like I studied creative writing. So I think I always approach my graphic novels first through, I guess, a novelist lens, which is not, I don't think a lot of other graphic novelists do that. So basically, I will write out the entire book as if it's like a novella or just a novel. Like I write it out like just normally like instead of like planning out specific frames or like images, I'll be like, um Nina said this, and I'll have like dialogue tags and everything, and then from there I'll take it chapter by chapter, and then from there I'll start visualizing it as a graphic novel. Like I'll break up the paragraph into frames or just a single image. um, it's not like the most efficient way of planning out a graphic novel, but that's kind of what works for me best. when I'm writing a story, that's kind of just how it comes out of me, like as a novel or a novella. And then what's fun for me is kind of just branching out into the visual format, because once you start illustrating it, you can tell kind of a second story as a layer to that story. So, for example, someone can be like, someone will be, a scene will be set in someone's bedroom, and then you actually get to illustrate that bedroom and put like what books are on their shelf, what posters are on their wall. So that's what I always find really fun about that part of fleshing out the world. But yeah, so I basically just start my graphic novels as a novel, and then from there, I add the graphic part later.
That is so fascinating to know. Yeah, and I think what you're saying makes so much sense that in some of the panels, some of the drawings do help to sort of add other like there's a really brilliant thing you do where you'll kind of tag everything in the image of how much everything costs to buy, which really helps to kind of show like, okay, there's a space that these girls are living in, and then there's a space where like their bosses are and like the higher ups in publishing, and the cost disparity there is really, really interesting to see visually. It's very, very cool.
Oh yeah,
Um,
thank you for mentioning that.
of course, it's so cool. Let's see, we've got another question here from Gael. How do you overcome writer's block? What do you do when the words are just not coming?
um, I feel like, yeah, I do get in my own head a lot, where I feel like, oh, it's been a week or a day or a month since I've created anything that I liked. And it's easy to spiral once you're in that state of mind. And for me, like, the way I get out of it is just consume as much art as possible, whether that's music, books, or movies, even if it's not even related to the kind of art that I want to create myself, but just seeing like what other artists are doing, even if it's from like a different century. That kind of always, if I really connect with it, that usually like it makes me feel compelled to create my own art. And yeah, I feel like I was kind of in that state of mind the other day, where I felt like I haven't really created anything lately, and so all I had to do was kind of like listen to a couple of my favorite songs. And I'm the kind of person who, when I listen to a song, I like to pretend I'm in a movie, and so that kind of like jogs my imagination that way. So for me, yeah, it's just consuming art.
She is Kate Gavino on Instagram and on Twitter. So you can check her out there. If you are still looking for something to buy your friends, your family, whoever for the holidays, I cannot recommend this book enough. You can get it we recommend your local bookstores. We have a few different links there. Bookshop.org is really, really great. Also, if you are in New York or Brooklyn in particular, Books Are Magic is my personal fave in terms of small independent bookstores. Greenlight Bookstore is also great. Or if you would rather buy from Penguin Random House, go ahead and do that. We are thrilled to get you this book however we can.